All right, there's the participant number going up.
And we're live, right?
We are live. Thank you everyone for joining. We're just going to give it another minute or so as the people trickle in. Numbers still going up pretty good. So. And perchance, any of you participants that were on the LinkedIn this morning, I will once again apologize profusely for the mishap and hope you will bear with us. All right, just give it a couple more seconds. All right, I think we're good. So again, everyone, thank you for joining. This webinar will be recorded. So all of you that were kind enough to attend, do know that once this is over and done and kind of tied up, you will receive a copy of the slides as well as a recording that you can go back and watch at your leisure. So with all that, I will kick it off to Stefan.
Yeah, thanks everyone for joining. I apologize for my voice. I just got sick right before the webinar yesterday. I'll try to do it anyway. So my co-host today is Team Abers, our field CTO here at WallArm. Hi, team.
Hey, everyone.
Hey, yeah, my name is Stefan. I'm one of the co-founders of WallArm. The topic of today is OWASP API security with the flavor of practitioners. So it's basically like 2 weeks ago, we discussed like what are the new things in the new OWASP API Security 2023. We didn't go much into the details about like what is every single item of OWASP, but we more talked about like what's new, what changed, like do we agree with the changes, this kind of stuff. So what we're doing today is basically go through all of the items of OWASP API Security Top 10 list. And frankly, it will be 11, not top 10. It's kind of a spoiler. So let me start with showing this picture. So I don't want to spend a lot of time today. If you're interested, like what were the changes? Just listen to the webinar we did 2 weeks ago. We talked a lot about like what's new and what do we think about the changes. What I want to start with today is actually giving you some resources that can help you facilitate learning. So it's great to have a OWASP. This is a great framework of thinking, and this is a great foundation to build your API security program, but it's good to have some kind of playground and training resources as well. So a lot of people are asking, like, what do you recommend? Like, obviously, OWASP is a great place to start. Then secondly, there is Contra, which is a free interactive application security training module. So you don't need to deploy anything in your computer, just like do everything in the browser, play around with different vulnerabilities, understand what they really are, what is the root cause of them. I think super helpful. And another thing I recommend is the API hacking exercises from Wesley. Wesley was kind enough like to host a few webinars for us. And I'm a big fan of everything he writes and produces the lessons. So like highly recommend to watch his YouTube channel and like reading all the articles he wrote about the API security. Specifically, they are very practitioners oriented. I'll talk a little bit about the playground later, but there's also a number of platforms. It's not even the platform. It's a number of APIs and applications that intentionally were developed vulnerable so that you can play around and understand those vulnerabilities. I'll talk a little bit more about that. Let's jump right into the OWASP list. So like once again, we'll talk about every item here. Like me and team will give out our perspectives. And feel free to ask questions if you have any. Like we'll try to address them at the very end of the presentation. We also like to show you a demo of what we do as a company, you know, like for every single of those, of every single of those OWASP API security threats. But let me start with BOLA. So like BOLA is broken object level authorization. So a lot of people would argue, should it be number one in the list? Is that important? Good question. It is important. Maybe it's not the most important thing, but like we definitely see a lot of BOLA vulnerabilities and breaches related to the BOLA vulnerabilities out there. So like we definitely should talk about that and understand what it is. Another name for BOLA, quite frankly, IDOR. Like for those of you who are familiar with the OWASP top 10 original, which was and still is for application security, like on the broader sense, it is named IDOR there. But basically, this is a situation when there is a failed access control, and because of this failed access control, our user is allowed to get an access to the objects they are not supposed to have an access to. So like they just should not be authorized to access, but because of some glitch, some mistake, there is something wrong with the authorization, and the user can get an access to the user, like to the object anyway. And it sounds simple, but like you can see, and like you will listen to, like a lot of those vulnerabilities and threats that we will talk today, they kind of simple as a concept, but they are very, very dangerous. As you can see, OWASP providing this different kind of risk scores. Like it's a risk rating, it's 8.0 for BOLA. You can see like details about the attack vector, security weaknesses, impacts. We won't talk about them, but like keep in mind that you have them so that you can assess like which of them more important, which of them less important, and so forth. For BOLA, there have been a number of examples of where this was the reason of the data breach. You can find a lot of them. Just like look BOLA security breach, and you will be amazed how often it can happen. I guess what's more interesting is to understand like how to prevent yourself against this situation. And the recipe is pretty straightforward, frankly. It's all about authorization. So just like make sure that you have proper authorization mechanism that would check if the logged in user has permission to perform an action or not. So basically like you need to have this authorization controls everywhere. It's very easy to miss it. So like you just need to check and understand like that you are verify the authorization, like, and you implement the authorization like everywhere. Another kind of practical way to prevent against BOLA exploitation is to randomly generate GUIDs. So like if they are hard to guess, for the attacker, it would be more challenging to like to exploit BOLA vulnerability. So that would be probably the short summary of it. Tim, if you don't have anything to add, I'll switch to the next one.
No, I think you've covered that one well.
We talk about authorization. There's also authentication, right? And like there's a number of different things that come with the issues with the authentication. So when we talk about this specific one, we typically talk about two things. One, there can be issues with the way how the authentication is implemented, and the attackers can get some kind of leverage because of it. But sometimes, authentication is okay, but still, the attackers and bad guys, they try to abuse it somehow, and they get something out of it. So, like, I would suggest like to think about this from two perspectives. One of the most important thing about authentication, and like it's easy as like if you have your authentication which is implemented improperly, most of the security measures that you have are obsolete. Like the technical flaw in the user authentication system can basically allow the bad guys to impersonate your users. And like sometimes it's related to leaked tokens in sessions. Sometimes like it's a vulnerability in the code, and the attackers is gain some kind of leverage because of it. So when we talk about like what you should do about that, number one thing is always try to make sure that you use only standards for authentication. JWT, OAuth because this is the latest thing you want to do, is just like to implement something from scratch if there are so many things that are available there. And even implementing this is already challenging enough. So like don't add more challenges on your plate. There are a couple of other things to mention here, like multi-factor authentication where it's possible, and some other things. Tim, you probably will add a few recommendations.
Yeah, I think, for me, testing is always a big thing, right? And it's got to be negative testing as well as positive testing. Session length, session expiration, those are things that are easy to forget to test. If you expect your sessions to expire after 30 minutes, make sure your tokens and your sessions are expiring after 30 minutes. I think so often we forget to do those negative testings, and especially with authentication, it's really, really important to get those negative testings. And it's hard, right? APIs, there's lots of different APIs, and bringing fuzzing into the mechanism of your testing is also something that's not only interesting and fun as it's fairly new. It's really fun to see how a fuzzer can really test your APIs for even usernames and passwords, and different types of injections into your JSON payloads.
Totally.
And then we have a number of ways we help with this. We've got brute force triggers that we can set up. We can also detect JWT vulnerabilities, whether that's weak algorithms, no signatures. There's a number of things that we'll detect on the request coming in, so that we can actually just show you, hey, it looks like you may have a problem with this API because your JWTs that we're seeing on it are weak. And then, of course, API secrets, where we go and look for tokens and keys and usernames and passwords that are all attributed to your websites. So those are ways that we can help with our product to fix API 2. And we'll show you a little bit of that when we get into the demo.
Yeah, by the way, I didn't mention like what do we do for the ball vulnerability. So like there's a couple of things we do as a company. So first of all, we discover all the API endpoints that can be potentially vulnerable to the ball attacks. And also like we allow you to implement the security control that prevent the ball exploitation. If we see that there is a potential ball vulnerability, we can basically prevent it from being exploited, which is pretty impactful. The third thing is broken object properly level authorization, API number 3. So we're initially, if you remember, I don't think you remember, frankly, because like we've been chatting with team another day, like, do you remember like the whole OWASP API security by heart? And
Nope,
like,
I don't remember day to day, and I talk about it every day.
Yeah. So like, it's really hard to remember all those things. But if you remember, there have been excessive data exposure issue, and there was an issue which was called mass assignment. Those two are related really, and they are now part of this broken object proper level authorization. BOPLA is another way to say this. It's kind of the similar vulnerabilities, and the situation here is once again pretty simple. Sometimes attackers can exploit endpoints that basically does not check what kind of properties should be accessed by the user. So like, for example, the application can give, like as a response, it can return the whole object, with all the properties, even to the very simple request. For example, there's an API method that is asking for date of birth of a user. But if the application is wrong, like is developed in the wrong way, this API method may just like return the whole thing and like pretend that the client side would filter out and just like work with the date of birth, but like it basically will return everything. And you'll be surprised. This is an example of excessive data exposure. You'll be surprised how often we see this. Another way around also works. So like mass assignment, there's a method which is supposed to work with like two properties. Let's say it's like username and password. But in reality, like attacker can try to, add a few other properties there. And sometimes, like the application will basically eat them and allow the attackers to operate with those properties as well. So like we see this all the time. So BOPLA is an interesting vulnerability that is very specific to the APIs. So that's why it's like part of this list. Our recommendation here is once again pretty simple, and obviously you see all those items on the screen. We'll share the presentation with you. There is no way we can cover all of those recommendations. We only touch the most important ones, and for this specific one, obviously you need to define what object properties are to be returned in your API functions, rather than return the entire projects with all the properties. So this would eliminate all the vulnerabilities related to the successive data exposure. And another way around, you should be very specific in limiting what properties API method can modify, and validate it, maybe validate the schema. So like that's maybe one of the important things. By the way, we have this API firewall, which is an open source project, cloud native open source project that can give you an option to validate our schema everywhere. It's free of charge, like everybody can just take and use it. And as a product, we also have a few things to offer. So first of all, we detect when there is information exposure vulnerabilities, when your app is returning more than it should be, but also like we can detect different kind of attacks related to mass assignment and related threats. Our team, do you have to add anything?
No, I think the biggest thing here is to, again, it's the fuzzer should help, especially with JSON. Create, where we see this a lot is when you're creating users and changing properties in users. If they're an admin and you have an admin property, you'll see a lot of BOPLA problems with those types of events.
Right. Okay, let's switch to the next one then. API for unrestricted resource consumption. So we're passing
this one has been out there for a long time. It's really more of a reminder. Hey, don't just let your APIs hang out there without putting some kind of constraints on them. Most folks would put a rate limit. I would say rate limits are good. CPU limits are also good. Memory limits are also good. It's to protect not only your bank account, right? Because typically when we have APIs, they use resources cost money. So we try to prevent the bank account from growing too big, but also from taking down the application. So rate limiting on the front end is a great way to do it. Putting throttles on CPU, on memory, are also other good ways to restrict resource consumption. Being able to monitor, being able to have thresholds set, just basic operational principles of running an operations, things that really need to look at when you're looking at APIs, because they're so exposed and they're so easy to attack.
Yeah, I mean, speaking about the unrestricted resource consumption, like the number one recommendation is basically to use rate limiting. So can you unpack it maybe?
Yeah, I mean, rate limiting, we've got a number of ways that you can do rate limiting. I think gone are the days of only rate limiting by IP. I think we've definitely got a way to rate limit by other options, anything in the header. I think rate limiting is fun. I think there's lots of things you can do with rate limiting to create a scenario where you can really make sure that your resources aren't overconsumed. And then I would say performance testing is a big thing here, right? With flash sales, with Black Friday, Cyber Monday, I come from a retailer e-commerce environment. Those things are always important to be doing performance testing every release so that you can see what's going on. Even if you're doing micro performance testing per API, can really help understand, version to version, how your performance is trending, and then where to set that rate limit. Knowing where you're going to tip over is always important.
Yeah, typically API management and API gateway software can give you, even load balancing, can give you some basic capabilities for the rate limiting, which you absolutely need to start using. So start with that one. There's a big chance you need to do something more sophisticated, for example, what a OWASP is recommending is that you would need sometimes throttle how many times or how often a single API client or user can execute a single operation. So it's not easy to do because it's not limitation by IP, right? You would need to understand the session. You need to distinguish what are the requests coming from different users. And one of the things we implemented now with advanced APIs, advanced rate limitings, basically rate limited by sessions, which might be an important thing here. Switching to the next one, API 5, broken functional level authorization, BFLA. Those names are funny, but here is one again, pretty simple in a concept thing. What the bad guys sometimes do, they take a method, API method. Let's say it was a method with a get verb, and they redo the request by changing the method to put. And if the application is developed in the wrong way, if you don't implement the right checks, the attacker can basically start using some capabilities that they're not supposed to use, and this is an example of business logic vulnerability, like exactly example of business logic vulnerability, which is why number one recommendation is basically to go to the code and deny all access by default, and like as a step number one, and step number two, require explicit grants to specific roles access to every function. So it's kind of overlapping a lot with the VOLA in a way of authorization. I think the prevention is fairly similar. So you really need to think about authorization everywhere. And sometimes we over rely on the framework, or we believe that the framework is doing the whole thing. And the downside of using frameworks sometimes is that we don't really know what's happening. We just like rely on the whole thing. And if somebody's doing a mistake, there is a good chance there is no authorization checks at all. And here you have like API 1, Bolar, and this API 5, broken function level authorization. So just make sure that you have authorization checks across the board for every function, for every verb. So like everywhere it should be. And there is a couple of things we can provide as a company, like with the products. First of all, we can detect different kind of attacks like path traversal and forced browsing, but also we can identify vulnerabilities like forced browsing again, and the open redirect and path traversal. So like there's a couple of things we can help as well. So like we'll talk about that during the demo. Okay, API 6, server-side request forgery.
Server-side request forgery, brand new to the OWASP API Top 10. Hasn't been new to the world. Just got enough, I think, visibility now that people are really trying to limit SSRF vulnerabilities that are being seen. And really, this is really when you have a URI or a URL that redirects to another host, whether that local in your environment or somewhere else. What this is gives the attacker a foothold into trying to change and manipulate URLs into something else. So webhooks, if you're doing webhooks, make sure that you are looking at your URLs that you're providing on that webhook to make sure that they're not exploitable, to send a third party to a different place. These have been in existence for a long time. Not new to the security world, but new to the API Top 10 list. And these are really important to make sure that you're testing these and making sure that you're driving prevention, because that's the easiest way to solve this problem. Number of ways that you can solve this. Testing. It'll be a key theme for me. Don't allow redirects, HTTP redirects inside your application or in your web servers. Both of those are good ideas. And make sure you have a WAF that can look for that vulnerability, that SSRF vulnerability. And that's something that we do and have done for a while. So this is a new to the top 10, but again, definitely not new to the security world.
Yeah, we presented SSRF research back in 2015 on the Black Hat. And I think at that moment, we also published a book called the SSRF Bible with a lot of examples of how the attackers use SSRF, or enumerating internal resources, or bypassing firewalls, or getting outside of the customer environment with some kind of sensitive data. So we're glad that this is a part of the API security OWASP 10, because it makes a lot of sense in this. Switching to the API number 7, security misconfigurations.
Yeah, this one's a fun one because if it doesn't fit anywhere else, just put it into a security misconfiguration. This has got to, I mean, you could literally, I think, put every single top 10 list underneath the security misconfiguration.
Right.
This one is really, really funny to me, but really what this is trying to do is, get down to the things underneath the APIs. So do you have endpoints that are open that shouldn't be open because you just started up your Nginx server? Do you have an operating system that is unpatched, or a PHP or Python code that are living inside your Nginx server that are unpatched? Do you have the right security on your files and directories? There's so many ways that something can be misconfigured, especially in today's world of cloud. Clouds aren't easy. There's lots of things to configure. Roles aren't easy. There's lots of things to configure. And when there's lots of things to configure, there are lots of things to mess up. So, this one is kind of a catch-all to me. But anything that has a configuration can fall underneath API 7.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And they we mentioned it before, but a lot of times people are asking, hey, like, why this vulnerability even related to the APIs? And we say, hey, this vulnerability is not really related to the application level, but it can affect the server where your API is running. So, or let's say it can give a direct access to the bad guys. So like, that's why it's obviously related to the APIs. And you would be surprised like how many very well-established companies, like very mature orgs, have the security misconfiguration. So like, we now believe that it's just everybody has it. So it's all about like having security controls in place so that you can catch and prevent those things early on in the process. Some stupid stuff we see all the time, like MongoDB with the default credentials, or Git repository exposed outside, and like the attacker can just download the whole content of the whole source code of the company. There's so many other examples there, but it's all related to the simple thing when somebody configure something in the wrong way, or didn't patch it, or didn't apply the right policy. So like, all those things are everywhere. And like, for our task is basically help you identify those misconfigurations and also prevent a situation where somebody is taking advantage of them. So I will show this during the demo as well. Our API 8, lack of protection from automated threats, Tim.
Yeah, this is getting a lot more attention. Bots are becoming a bigger and bigger thing. What I find incredibly funny is I think I saw a tweet a couple of days ago that Elon Musk has kind of given up on bots and saying you have to be verified and pay me money in order to start doing certain things inside of Twitter. How half of that is probably he just wants the money, but it's interesting to see how many bots across technologies are affected by those bots. Facebook, Twitter, they're prevalent and they're really hard to stop. You've got ones that come in really fast. Those are probably a little bit easier. There are ones that come in really slow, which are really hard to find. And so, really, this is about how do you protect yourself from things that are doing abnormal things. So if my users are typically doing this behavior and I see something doing different, what do you have to protect yourself from that? Or to make that visible, even if you can't protect from it, but making it visible. I think that's, the point of this is we've got to get smarter with our security and really start using behavioral analytics as well as just looking at triggers and rate limiting. And so we've got, oh, go ahead.
I don't know. I just want to add that APIs are so easy to abuse. I'm saying this all the time because not everybody understands it. API by definition is something that is developed to be consumed by the other software. It can be some partners, it can be client application. And as a result of it, like, it's very easy, to send thousands of requests and basically ask for some kind of stuff. And it's not easy to mitigate those things, like with the application. If we talk about the web apps, you can inject JavaScript and like do some kind of capture, proof of work. With the mobile apps and with the APIs, yeah, you also can use SDKs and something, but there is a number of cases when you don't really have an option to have any JavaScript capture or JavaScript challenge or proof of work or whatever. It's just like the only way for you is basically rely on the behavioral analytics, like Tim is saying. And it's really, really hard to implement those checks. You can try something in-house, and for among other webinars, we're talking about like what you can try by yourself, as you know, step number 1, step number 2, step number 3, in mitigating those bots. And there are some things you need to try, and like it's easy to try. Block all the access from AWS or other cloud providers. Bots are coming from there. Block bad user agents. Yeah, obviously some dumb bots still have this, agents that are incorrect or something. There is a number of other things you can do, but ultimately, unfortunately, if you're dealing with the sophisticated bots, it's really, really hard to mitigate all those threats.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is probably one of the hottest places right now. When you talk to people, you've got API discovery on one hand and API abuse. So tell me what my APIs are, and tell me who's abusing them. Like those are the two dichotomies of people that we talk to almost every day.
Right. Okay, switching to API 9, improper inventory management. Team, do you want to take it?
Sure. Speaking of APIs, is looking at old API versions. Really, this is really around knowing what you got, knowing what you're using, knowing what's there and shouldn't be there, which is probably the most important. Making sure you have visibility across your entire portfolio. We go into large customers all the time and ask them, can we see do you have an inventory of all of your APIs? And very rarely will you find a large enterprise customer saying, yeah, we know everything that we're using. And I think this is one of the hardest things to keep your hands around, because you've got so many different development teams doing so many different things, moving at the speed of light, trying to understand and push out features as fast as they can for their customers. How do you as a security professional keep up with that? And you've got to have something in place to be watching for that, watching for what should be there, watching for what's new, watching for the things that shouldn't be there, and really taking that into account. So, the prevention is pretty easy. Inventory all API endpoints. Well, that's easy to say. That's really hard to do. And so, these are great, but practically, usually you need to have a tool, especially if you have a large enterprise, you need to have tools that are watching the traffic to make sure that that those APIs that you expect to have hit, to expect to be exposed are exposed. You need to know what data is inside each one of those and bubble up those to the top. And we'll show you a little bit about what we do in the demo about looking at the sensitive data versus non-sensitive data, looking at attacks on those endpoints that are just sensitive versus attacks on maybe a Git versus a post that has sensitive data in it. And so those are all things to look at when you're looking at inventory management. Again, shadow APIs, zombie APIs. If you've ever seen our stickers, we've got some great stickers with some zombie and shadow API figurines on them. Those are important because those are the ones that the attackers are using, right? So if I can spin up an API that has malicious code in it, or at least code that I can exfiltrate data in it, it doesn't take long to push, a couple of terabytes of data outbound from an environment these days, especially when you're in a cloud that has huge pipes. It's not hard to really move that out quickly. So it's really important to know when things come up and be alerted on those things.
There are some open source tools now, like for example, for Kubernetes environments, there are some open source tooling that you can use to have at least part of API inventory automatically based on the traffic. But yeah, in most cases, the team said it's not easy to do. So you would need a dedicated products for that. Switching the gear a little bit to the next one, which is unsafe consumption of the APIs. I know that's also yours, right, Tim?
Yeah, this is talks a lot about third parties, right? So whether that is external or third party APIs, you can't just trust people anymore, or not trust API. You can't trust data anymore from third parties. We've seen a number of incidences over the past couple of years where the supply chain of applications and data from third parties have been infiltrated, and then that gets pushed down to customers. And now you're you've got issues as a customer because you've pulled something, whether that's data from an API, whether that's a library, either way. This is really about unsafe consumption of those APIs. Make sure that you're looking at the data coming in. Don't trust that the data is going to be the way that the spec says it's going to be. Make sure that you have things in place to really drive integrity of those requests.
Absolutely. And here are some recommendations. It's funny that OWASP included injections as a part of this unsafe consumption of APIs, but we really think that injection and injections, like SQL injections, are like all the other injections, should be a category in its own. So we talked about this 2 weeks ago. The reason for that is a lot of people tend to think, hey, with all the frameworks for the APIs, we don't have the problem with the injections, which is easy to believe in because it's a good theory. Practically, what we're observing among our customer base, what we're observing in our vulnerability threat stats report, is that most of the critical vulnerabilities are still related to some kind of injections. This is the data for all the publicly known vulnerabilities, different kind of CVEs from 2022, where we basically match the CVE to CWEs, and over half are basically related to different kind of injection related to CWEs. So don't forget about it. Don't be fooled if OWASP will remove injection from the list, because this is still one of the most impactful vulnerability that the bad guys are taking advantage of. That's for sure. Before we jump into the demo, I just wanted to show you these resources. Once again, I already talked a little bit about them, but this is an amazing, really amazing way to learn OWASP and to learn more about vulnerabilities, because there is nothing you can do better than trying those things by yourself. So there is 5 APIs that are on the screen right now, which are intentionally developed to be vulnerable. So there are bol vulnerabilities, there are injection vulnerabilities, there are other vulnerabilities related to authorization, for instance, or authentication. Think of them as exercises or a quest. So you basically can spin up some of them as a Docker container and play around, really understand what is the vulnerable code, how to exploit it. Try to spin up the security solution, by the way, and test if your security products like WAF and API Gateway can protect against those things. You will be surprised they're not. And in many cases, those solutions, for example, this VA MPI, it comes with a Postman collection. So it's basically a collection that is predefined, and you can use it to execute some of the attacks. So you don't really need to invent the payloads or something. So it's a good example. In some cases, it's related to the GraphQL application. So GraphQL is here. In the next couple of years, it will be half of the APIs that are based on the GraphQL. So it's important to understand what it is, even though if you are not using GraphQL at the moment. So I think that's an incredibly helpful list of resources so that you can circulate among your team, maybe do a hackathon one day and really go deep into the what the hell are API vulnerabilities, how to work with them, how to identify them, how to get those things. And believe me, all the slides that we have here would matter much more and would make much more sense when you actually see what is the vulnerability, what can be the potential impact of it. At this, let me stop sharing and over to you, team, so that we can show something that we do as a company. You're on mute. You're on mute, Tim.
Darn double muting buttons. So the API top 10, kind of the theme that we've been doing for the last couple of webinars. We have a dashboard, and I call this the operational executive dashboard, because it's great for operationally seeing things that are going on in your environment, as well as being able to cut and paste this into an email to your executive saying, here's where we stand today. Here's where we stand this week. It's just a great summary to give them an idea of what WallArm as a product sees in your environment where we are looking. So you'll see that we've got a 2019 and a 2023. So we base this on the RC, the release candidate. So this one will come out and in full once we have the official list. So let's look through some of these. We've got time. Get your questions ready. You can start asking those if you have them. We'll pick those up in a couple minutes. So ask them if you got them, and then we'll put those in order. That was my quick Rick commercial. So our OWASP API top 10 dashboard. Each category has three things. They have a security control. Each one of them has a place where we tell you what we can do and how to configure those things in our product. And then we actually show you different vulnerabilities for the particular top 10 risk. And then where applicable, we'll actually show you hits as well. So we've got lots of different ways we can show you data that we have in our product. So if we look at this one, this is API 2, gives you an idea of what it is, because when I can't remember it and I'm talking to customers on demos, I have them in front of me, so I can actually refer to them right here, which is really nice. And then the security controls. This one is about turning the scanner on. We've got some brute force triggers, and it'll take you right to the page to create some triggers. And so the other thing that's really nice is it'll show you the vulnerabilities. So if we look at the vulnerabilities for this one, you'll see that we've got a JWT that is on this endpoint or is running through the system that has no algorithm for signing, which is probably not a great thing. Something that we probably have to look at and fix. And so if we look at, say, the compromised secret key, this one's a fun one to look at. So here's a web token that the application is allowing a compromised key of your 256-bit secret as part of the JWT, so it's easy to exploit. We want to make sure that that the application isn't accepting that. And so we see that it is, so we let you know about it, right? So visibility sometimes is the best remediation course, and then letting you know so that you can do something about it. So those are great things to look at in the product. Let's look at a couple of other ones. Let's look at injections, just because we like it so much. In the old 2019 top 10 list, it was API 8. So you'll see we've got 2.39 million hits. You can see what those hits are: RCEs, SQL injections, cross-site scriptings, remote command execution, and then the vulnerabilities related to those, as well as having the scanner on. That scanner really is a way for us to look across your digital property and really tell you all of the different digital properties that we see. Make sure that you can know, even if it's a third party. We get a lot of questions on our scanner. Hey, this server or this IP address isn't one of ours. And when you look at it, it's actually one of the names in your DNS that you have your digital property pointed at. And so we'll actually pick up on that. So whether you're managing it or whether a third party manages it, we'll actually look across the board. So this is good to see. You know, mass assignments. You'll see that we'll block these as well. People trying to do different nefarious things to try to see what they can actually attack and have access to. So again, that's our top 10 dashboard. Let's see, what am I doing on time here? I think the other thing that we'll talk about real quick, since we're talking about APIs, is our API discovery. This is really around that inventory management, knowing what you have, knowing who's using it, knowing what's getting attacked, right? So if we want to look at endpoints with sensitive data, we can select login credentials, or if you want to do it by risk score, we can do it by high risk score. We'll see, oopsie. I like to do it by risk and then by hits. Here you'll see that we have 210 attacks against this API. The other place you can see that is in our API discovery dashboard. You see the same thing here. The dashboard is really more just a quick glimpse of what's going on. So great operationally to come in and go, oh, I've got 210 hits against a risky endpoint. We better go look at those. And then you can click right through and see what those are and what they're doing in those. So lots of great things. And then the other thing that we talked about is API abuse and bots, and lots of bots. So our API bot prevention or abuse prevention, because it'll have more things coming with that. That'll be just more than just bots. These are our behaviors, our machine learning algorithms to look at behaviors. We tell you which IPs we believe are bots based on which detectors, so that you can look through them. In the events section, you'll actually find, if we do a type, you'll actually find API abuse. And then we can take a look at, this bot compared to, say, Yahoo or Google bot, so that you can know if this bot is actually a bad bot or a good bot. So lots of interesting things we can do here, lots of great dashboards that the group has put together. So really helpful when you're looking for those bots and those automated attacks. Okay, do we want to take some questions? Rick, do we have any questions?
Yes. So we got our first question from Charles Jones. Sorry. Kind of a higher level question of, what is an API security risk management strategy or framework that would for the financial services industry? So I don't know if we can talk about a framework, but maybe even just some of the key factors you should be thinking about if you were working in financial services.
Financial services are interesting. I consulted at a bank here locally in Columbus, and their threats are no different. There's just a lot more sensitive data. I think that's the biggest thing, is when you look at risk management from an API standpoint, it's really knowing what your API endpoints are and what your threat vectors are, and then really focused on where you have that sensitive data, and put a lot of time and effort around that sensitive data. That's the way that I would start my strategy. Stepan, I'm sure you have more ideas in this area.
Yeah, it's frameworks are important, and we'll like to talk about the frameworks. Our framework is not everything though, so be careful with picking just one and implementing it without understanding the full concept of API security. I would say there are 3 things you need to care about, to start with. API discovery, especially for the financial services. API discovery and posture management. What are the APIs that handle personal data? Which of them should be compliant to different kind of regulations? Which of them have vulnerabilities? Which of them are attacked? So this can give you the risk score, at least to start something with. And you can prioritize your security efforts based on this risk score. Then when you have this risk score, you will see, okay, these are the, let's say, 200 API endpoints that are super critical. How to make sure that they are protected? What's the strategy here? And I think this dashboard that we presented today, it's actually a very good way of thinking. If you have the right security controls, if you have anything related in terms of the attacks, if you have any visibility of what's going on. So think about it as a API threat prevention, kind of how to mitigate the risks that are related to those APIs that are most risky. And the third thing is probably testing. So we didn't talk about testing today, but we also provide the automated API security testing. So absolutely API security testing should be a part of your development pipeline. So whatever you release to production should be tested for different kind of API flaws and vulnerabilities. Those checks can be easy, checking for right authentication authorization. can be an easy thing to implement, but like this can help really be helpful. So, but happy to talk more and like give examples of our customers from the financial services. So, happy to understand like your use case. Okay, Rick, what are the other questions?
So I just got a question. It kind of talks to the two sides of WallArm that says many WAF products bundle in API security. What ways does WallArm differ, and what additional features are been brought in to compete with these existing combo products?
Yeah, like we can talk more about that, and we can talk a lot about this kind of stuff. Our WAF vendors don't have any choice other than adding API security capabilities, because at the end of the day, it's all about APIs, right? Like 80% of all the internet traffic are API calls. All of the applications are based on the APIs. Unfortunately, most of the WAFs are developed in a way when they analyzed every single request on its own, try to apply regular expressions and make a decision if this request is malicious or not. So for the API security, it's more about like seeing the whole picture, like what are the sessions, what are the users, what are the behavior, what are the threats. The threats can be identified actively and passively. Actively, when we actually can send a bunch of requests to the API to see if it's vulnerable or not, and passively when we analyze the behavior, the request, and the reaction of the API. So our WallArm is a combination of two products. Like we didn't talk about that, but I'm happy to give you a presentation of the product. But basically, it's API and API security, API and application security platform are with two product offerings. Like one is the WAP are really cloud native WAF, which we believe the best on the market. And another product is API security, which comes with a few modules: our API discovery and posture management, our API threat prevention, and the API our security testing. So happy to give you a full overview there.
So we got another question. Does WallArm rely on OWASP core rules or any regex-based rules?
Yeah, we actually don't. One of the core tenets when they design the product was actually not to use regex. So for our core product, we have detection and protection rules that are token based rather than regex based. Now, we do have a rules engine. So if we want and customers want to add regex rules on top of it, we have the ability to do that. But our core rule set is not regex based. It's actually token based. We have lots of documentation and blogs about how we do this. So if you're interested, we're happy to talk more about that. But we do have a core rule set, and that core rule set incorporates all of the OWASP core rules plus many others.
So we have a question from Lucien, and just trying to make sense of this. What about?
Yeah, there's a question I see. What percent of enterprises even have a correct API inventory? I think that's a great question.
Yeah.
Every time we talk like with the enterprises, especially larger companies, and when we ask a question, how many APIs they have, people start laughing because there is no way most of the companies even know how many APIs they have, how many endpoints they have, like what they have, like what kind of personal data they handle. So that's why this is a really important problem that make it way to our API OWASP Top-10 right now. Like, and team talked a lot about like the importance of the discovery and API inventory. I would say that over the course of the last year, we saw a lot of interest in this topic. So like a lot of enterprises and even mid-sized companies started to think, hey, you're right. We don't know what are the APIs. We don't know like what APIs expose sensitive data. We have zero visibility in changes into the APIs. We have documentation gaps. So like, let's do something about it. And I think there's like much more maturity around this topic would be like this year and next year for sure.
I think Vivek has a good one. which
Yeah.
is a kind of the next level is the will the existing WAFs be replaced? And I don't know that they will. I think you'll find that there are things that people want for APIs. There are things that WAFs do really well, and using them in combination is really, I think, where we have found the sweet spot of it's not one or the other. It's really for APIs of both and. If you've got, applications, single page applications, legacy applications that you need WAF for, that's great. But you also need WAF for APIs. Like, you need the base core tenets of WAF for APIs. So I don't think they'll ever go away. We may talk about them less because they're just going to be like the OWASP API top 10 is kind of doing with injections, is just kind of assuming that they're there. People are just going to assume that they're in the product. I think. Stefan, what are your thoughts on that?
I think it's good to have both. Like, you should have a WAF and really understand, hey, this is a WAF, and have API security product in place. The good thing, if you don't need to glue them together, you don't need to think about integrations or whatever, because some of the API security products, they don't really mitigate any attacks. They can send alerts to the API gateway, or maybe even a WAF to block those threats. I think the key thing, and this is a part of our philosophy, is that it should be one integrated platform when there is a WAF component and there is API security component, and they are working side by side every day, because it's so important. At the end of the day, as I said, like, all the applications, like majority of the applications nowadays are API based. So in case of wall arm, you will have the WAF modules running, but you will have all the API security features. So that's an important thing. I see the question about log4j. Rick, can you read it?
Yeah, absolutely. So assume there's a scenario like log4j where we are vulnerable till the vendor releases patches. How soon would such attacks be prevented by WallArm?
Yeah, team talked a little bit about the attack prevention, and this is where we're proud to be very accurate, both in the false positives and false negatives. So we're applying a bunch of attack detection techniques which are innovative, like we don't use regular expressions. So with log4j, a typical vendor would need to implement the regular expression-based rule, add it, apply to all the nodes, and it takes time. Yeah, that's why I understand like why you're asking this question. In our case, the way our attack detection work, using the grammar-based analysis and other techniques, we were able to identify log4j even before the world knew about that. And the day we discovered this log4j, we added the hint basically to the system. Hey, do you see this kind of request? You already identified it as an injection. So this is not just an injection, it's log4j exploitation. So like retrospectively, we could see that customers were exploited by this log4j for months, even before it was like publicly announced. So like that's why the answer to the question is like in many cases we don't really need any changes. For majority of the attacks we can detect it based on our attack detection techniques. This is the beauty of not using regular expressions.
Okay. I'm going to go back to that one. Someone's asking, I see that you would see sensitive data parameters in your dashboards, I'm guessing. Are those captured and forwarded to the cloud, or can we sanitize them? Can we keep copy of the logs on-prem without forwarding it to the cloud? I guess a long question.
Yeah, this is so two things. Yeah, we have ways that you can sanitize any of the parts of the request that you'd like to. So that's absolutely the case. And actually we have some customers that will do a lot of obfuscation of data, which is great. Oh, now I gotta go find the question again.
Oh, sorry.
Then there was the second question. Yes, so you can sanitize them. We have our dashboard in the cloud will help you sanitize them. We've got rules that you can create to do that. And yes, you can keep logs on-prem without forwarding them to our cloud. Most of the data that we keep are just metadata, except for those for the events and the attacks. The events and the attacks are the ones that we send. So we don't keep all of your payloads, just the attacks that we're seeing, so that you can look at them and make sure that those are attacks. So, but yes, those can be obfuscated as well, and your logs can be kept local.
Okay. And I will not click them as answered until you're done reading it. Got a little jumpy there. So Narendran, and I apologize for that pronunciation. Is there auto traffic learning and automated tweaking or policy recommendation features available in the product to have a more granular level of rate limiting?
There is a variety of things that are related to the question. So where we definitely do the beauty of having API discovery, when we reconstruct the API structure based on the traffic, is that we actually know what we are protecting, and we know how users interact with those APIs. So as a result of it, like, we can offer triggers, and we can like tune the most of the attack detection techniques. So you don't really need to tune false positives in most cases. And even if there is a false positive, it's just like a one click of a button to say, hey, this is a false positive. Please make sure you don't detect this again. So like majority of our customers use this in the full blocking mode, which makes it a very, very, very good replacement for most of the webs on the market. So like, just proud of it. And Tim, maybe you can add something.
No, I think you're right. I think we're going to get more sophisticated as the year goes by, and really get down to some very interesting ways to do auto rate limiting, auto throttling, based on a number of aspects. That'll be really fun and interesting to both operations and security folks. Trying to make the job easier is the goal. Because when you have lots of APIs, that's really hard to set up rate limits across every API. So, and every API is going to perform differently because they're all different code. And so having a way that you can dynamically set those thresholds is really important, and we're really excited about.
Yeah, there's a good question from Vivek.
Yeah.
You got
Go ahead,
it,
Rick.
All right,
No, go ahead.
I'll tee it up. Can WallArm discover internal APIs, i.e. server-to-server calls, between different integrated applications?
Yeah, the answer to that is we can. There's a number of different deployment methodologies that we have that will allow this. So a lot just depends on how you're doing your deployment, and we can walk you through that. But the answer is yes. We have several ways that we can do that.
Yeah. All right. Let's do which answer that one. So with regards to your protection, can we specify a set of APIs where it needs to be blocked? Some might be in learning mode and some might be allowed if it is from allowed listed sources. So can we specify a set of APIs that need to be blocked?
Yeah. So in our rules engine, you can actually set what APIs or what rules are set on what paths that we're seeing in the product. So you can have some set to monitoring, some set to safe blocking, some set to blocking, some set to off. And then you can, based on the request coming in and different parameters, there's all sorts of complex things you can do. So the answer to that is yes. You can get yourself in trouble very quickly. The more complex these become, because you have to follow the bouncing ball down the rabbit hole in order to figure out what's going on in some of the requests. But the answer is absolutely yes.
Mm-hmm. And I think that is it for questions. Give that one more minute. And actually, we're a little over the time, so I do appreciate people that have stayed on. So I think, given that, we will kind of wrap up. So again, this webinar has been recorded, and you will, all the people here that have registered, you will receive a copy of the recording as well as the slide deck. We will also, as Stefan's bringing that up, I will also include it in the email. Definitely something you should check out is our API security checklist. A lot of good information in there on how you can build out kind of a robust API security program and go through a checklist that'll help you set it up and really gets really granular. So, well,
Thank you everyone for coming.
thank
Yep,
you very
thanks,
much,
everyone.
everyone. And we will see
Appreciate
you
it.
on the next webinar.
Thank you.